All right, so today we're diving deep into Baltimore's past, right? To uncover some surprising twists in the story of environmental justice.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, it
We're
is.
talking about those legacies of segregation
Right.
and some pretty unexpected outcomes, ones that really challenge some of our assumptions about, who gets the short end of the stick when it comes to the environment. I mean, you might think environmental injustice always means like minorities bearing the brunt of pollution and, lack of green spaces, but
Yeah.
Baltimore kind of flips the script in ways that make you rethink that whole picture.
Exactly. And, it's so interesting because we have some really thought-provoking research from the Baltimore Ecosystem Study,
Mm.
led by Morgan Grove and a team of experts. And they've been digging deep into how segregation, like going all the way back to the late 1800s, still shapes the city's landscape today.
Yeah.
So get ready for some aha moments.
Absolutely. To understand Baltimore, you really have to understand how deeply segregation is woven into its fabric. We're talking both legal segregation and the kind that happened just by practice,
Right.
creating a city divided sharply along racial and economic lines. And this division didn't just affect where people lived, it set the stage for unequal access to resources and opportunities, including a healthy environment.
So are you saying that this early segregation basically laid the groundwork for decades of environmental injustice?
Precisely. Think of it as a ripple effect. Those early patterns of housing, heavily influenced by discriminatory practices, play a crucial role in understanding the modern landscape of environmental justice in Baltimore. It's like those patterns are imprinted on the city itself.
Wow. Okay, so where do we even begin to unpack this? What's the most surprising thing that jumps out from this research?
Well, let's talk about pollution. You often hear about polluting industries being dumped in minority neighborhoods. But in Baltimore, the research actually shows something completely different. White neighborhoods are actually closer to toxic release inventory sites, which are basically locations with a higher concentration of industrial pollution.
Hold on. White neighborhoods are closer to the pollution? That seems totally backward. How did that happen?
It's a classic case of what was once good is now bad. See, back when these industries were booming, living near factories was considered a benefit, especially for white workers who held most of those jobs.
Okay, yeah.
They had easy access to employment, shorter commutes.
Makes sense.
But as time passed and we started understanding the health risks of industrial pollution, those once desirable locations became environmental burdens.
So those neighborhoods basically got stuck with the negative consequences that came later. That's pretty rough.
Ah.
But what about other types of environmental problems? Do those follow the more traditional pattern of environmental injustice we see in other cities?
Some do, absolutely. For instance, historically redlined neighborhoods, those deemed risky for investment, often due to their racial makeup, still bear the brunt of certain environmental burdens. You'll find a higher concentration of vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and importantly, a lack of trees in these areas.
Right, and we know those factors contribute to a whole cascade of issues, things like higher crime rates, those urban heat islands that make summers unbearable, and greater vulnerability to heat waves. It's like a domino effect.
Exactly. These neighborhoods face multiple environmental challenges, often stemming from decades of disinvestment and neglect. Understanding the historical context is really crucial to grasping why these issues persist even today.
So we've got this surprising situation where white neighborhoods are closer to industrial pollution, but historically redlined neighborhoods still face other environmental burdens. It paints a pretty complicated picture. But what about access to environmental amenities? The good stuff like parks and green spaces. Does Baltimore slip the script there too?
In a way, yes. This is where it gets even more interesting. The research actually shows that African American communities in Baltimore have greater access to parks within walking distance than white neighborhoods.
Wait, what? More access to parks? Now that's really not what I expected. How on earth did that happen?
Think of it as a legacy of past exclusion. You see, for a long time, many parks in Baltimore were segregated.
Right.
African Americans were denied access even to parks near their homes. It was only as white residents started moving to the suburbs, often due to discriminatory real estate practices like blockbusting, that African Americans finally gained access to these parks. They inherited a landscape of park availability that was once denied to them.
So white flight unintentionally led to greater park access for African Americans. That's a wild twist.
Exactly. They inherited this landscape of amenities. And it wasn't just parks either. Tree canopy cover follows a similar trend. African American neighborhoods often have more trees today, and that's also tied to past practices. White neighborhood associations actively promoted tree planting back in the day, creating a greener landscape that African Americans later inherited.
So it seems like we're seeing this theme emerge. Past discriminatory practices have led to this really unusual distribution of both environmental burdens and benefits. It really makes you think about the long-term impacts of these policies.
Yeah.
But is there more to it than just knowing what exists where? It feels like there's a deeper story here about how these patterns came to be.
You're spot on. To fully grasp the complexities of environmental justice in Baltimore, we have to dig deeper into the procedural injustices that shape these patterns over time.
Okay.
It's not just about the physical landscape, but about the decisions and processes that created it.
Okay, so let's do some digging. What can you tell us about these procedural injustices and how they've had such a lasting impact on the city?
Well, zoning variances are a great example. These are basically exceptions to zoning rules, and they can have significant environmental consequences. You can think of them as loopholes that allow things to happen that might not normally be permitted.
So like allowing a polluting factory to operate in a residential area?
Exactly.
I could see how that would be a problem.
And the research shows that between 1930 and 1970, these environmentally related zoning variances were disproportionately approved in redline neighborhoods. The areas deemed undesirable were often targeted for unwanted land uses.
That makes sense, given what we've already discussed. These neighborhoods were often seen as less desirable, less politically powerful, and therefore easier targets for things like polluting industries. It's like they were set up to bear the brunt of these decisions.
Precisely. And it wasn't just a matter of chance. Often, businesses deliberately sought to locate polluting operations in these neighborhoods, believing they were less likely to face resistance. They were taking advantage of existing inequalities.
So it was a combination of pre-existing conditions, purposeful targeting by businesses, and a lack of resources to fight back that made these neighborhoods so vulnerable. It's a recipe for environmental injustice.
Exactly. And that's a classic example of how procedural injustice works. It doesn't happen in isolation. It's deeply intertwined with those historical patterns of discrimination and disinvestment, creating this vicious cycle that's hard to break.
It's a tragic example of how seemingly neutral bureaucratic processes can be used to perpetuate inequality. But zoning variances weren't the only area where procedural injustice came into play, right? What about those parks we were talking about earlier? Were there similar issues there?
Absolutely. The fight to desegregate golf courses in Baltimore is a powerful example of procedural injustice in action. It shows how seemingly mundane aspects of city planning can become battlegrounds for environmental justice.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about how access to golf courses became an issue of environmental justice. It's not something you hear every day.
Well, in the 1920s, Baltimore started building municipal golf courses. But of course, they were all segregated.
Right.
African Americans were denied access. It wasn't until 1934 that they were allowed to play golf, but only at Carroll Park, a poorly designed and maintained course with just 9 holes.
So even when they were granted access, it was a clear case of separate but unequal. Classic. What happened next?
The Monumental Golf Club of Baltimore, an African-American organization, stepped up to challenge this policy. It led to a compromise where they could play at Carroll Park on certain days, while white golfers had exclusive access on other days. It was segregation disguised as a compromise.
Sounds like a classic attempt to maintain the appearance of fairness while still upholding inequality.
Exactly. But the Monumental Golf Club didn't stop there. They eventually sued the city for full access to all the courses, arguing that Carroll Park didn't even meet the separate but equal standard because of its poor quality. It was a smart move because it forced the city to choose between spending money to upgrade Carroll Park or desegregating all courses.
So they used the legal system to expose the inherent unfairness and force the city to make a change.
Precisely. And it worked. The city finally desegregated all its golf courses. But not without a fight. White neighborhood associations pushed back, claiming desegregation would lower property values and lead to an invasion of African American residents. Sound familiar?
Sadly, yes. Those arguments echo the resistance to integration we've seen in housing, schools, and other aspects of American life. It's a reminder that these issues are deeply interconnected.
Absolutely. But this fight for access to golf courses highlights how procedural injustice can show up in the most unexpected places. It wasn't just about access to leisure, it was about equal treatment and dignity.
It's a good reminder that environmental justice isn't just about pollution or toxins. It's about fair access to all the benefits a healthy environment can provide.
Were there other examples of this kind of procedural injustice related to parks and green spaces in Baltimore?
Absolutely. The way the city decided to acquire land for parks also reveals a pattern of biased decision-making. I bet this will be another case of those seemingly neutral procedures masking deeper inequalities. Tell me more about how park acquisition played into this whole issue.
Well, back in the 1940s, Baltimore realized it needed more parkland, especially in underserved areas.
Right.
They even had a private donor offer a sizable gift for park acquisition. So there were calls to create playgrounds in East Baltimore, which was largely African American, while others wanted a big park in predominantly white West Baltimore.
So a choice between addressing an immediate need in a marginalized community versus a potentially grander project in a more affluent area, I can already guess which way this went.
You got it. The city chose the large park in West Baltimore, their reasoning. East Baltimore was too risky an investment due to the condition and instability of the neighborhoods.
Wow, they basically used the existing inequalities as a reason to withhold resources. It's
Yeah.
almost unbelievable.
Exactly. They pointed to the very problems created by decades of redlining and neglect as justification for further disinvestment. It's a textbook example of how procedural injustice just perpetuates that cycle of disadvantage.
It's infuriating, but honestly not surprising, given what we've learned so far. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how the past continues to shape the present, even in ways that seem counterintuitive at first.
That's the key takeaway here. These patterns aren't random.
Yeah.
They're deeply rooted in historical decisions and practices. And what's even more fascinating is that perceptions of what constitutes an environmental amenity can change over time, adding another layer of complexity to this whole issue.
Oh, I bet that throws a whole new wrench into things.
Yeah.
Give me an example of what you mean by shifting perceptions.
Let's take tree planting programs, something often seen as universally positive. But in some predominantly African American neighborhoods in Baltimore, residents actually view trees with suspicion and even resistance.
Wait, really? Why would anyone be against more trees? They're usually considered a good thing, right?
That's the common assumption. But in these communities, it's more nuanced. Residents have seen how these well-intentioned programs can sometimes lead to gentrification and displacement, pushing them out of their own neighborhoods.
That's a really important point. What's seen as a benefit by some can be perceived as a threat by others,
Yeah.
depending on their context and lived experience.
Exactly. And there's another factor at play here. They also worry about the lack of resources for tree management. They've seen the city neglect basic services in their communities for decades, so promises of care for new trees just don't hold much weight.
Right.
They'd rather see those resources go towards more urgent issues like vacant lots, crime, and substandard housing.
So it's not that they don't value trees, it's that they're prioritizing other things that have a more immediate and tangible impact on their lives. Their perceptions are shaped by a history of broken promises and systemic neglect.
Precisely. It's a reminder that environmental justice can't be a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to understand the specific needs and concerns of communities that have been historically marginalized.
It's about creating a truly equitable and sustainable future where everyone benefits from a healthy environment.
You got it. And Baltimore's experience offers valuable lessons for other cities facing similar challenges. It shows that even in a city with a deep history of segregation and environmental injustice, positive change is possible. But it requires understanding the roots of the problem. We can't just focus on the symptoms, we have to get to the root causes if we want to create a truly just and sustainable future for everyone.
Well said. This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive so far. We've learned that Baltimore's history of segregation has created this complex and often unexpected landscape of environmental injustice. It's clear that those legacies continue to shape the present in both subtle and dramatic ways. But we've only just scratched the surface. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into Baltimore's environmental justice legacy, where we'll explore how the city is grappling with these complex issues and what lessons we can learn from its experience.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Baltimore's environmental justice landscape. We've seen how the city's history of segregation has created this unique and complex set of challenges, but it's also a story of resilience, right?
Right.
There are ongoing efforts to create a more just and sustainable future.
Yeah, that's right. And to really understand how Baltimore is tackling these challenges, we need to move beyond just describing the problems.
Right.
We need to explore, like, the solutions, the innovations, those community-driven initiatives that are making a difference.
Absolutely. One of the key takeaways from all this research is The need to recognize and address those procedural injustices that have led to these environmental inequalities.
Right.
It's not enough to just, redistribute resources or clean up polluted sites. We have to change the processes that created those problems in the first place.
So it's about shifting power dynamics and making sure communities that have been marginalized have a real voice in decisions that affect their environment and their lives.
Yeah.
Not just telling them what's going to happen, but actually involving them in the process.
Precisely. It's about empowering communities to be active participants in shaping their own future, not just passive recipients of solutions imposed from above.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you give us some concrete examples of how this is happening in Baltimore? How are communities taking charge and driving change?
One inspiring example is the work being done by the Baltimore Sustainability Commission.
Oh, okay.
It's a group of residents, activists, and experts who are advising the city on its sustainability plan.
You mentioned Baltimore's sustainability plan earlier. It sounds like a promising initiative. What are some of its key goals, and how is the commission ensuring that environmental justice is a central focus? Because as we've seen, it's easy to talk about sustainability, but actually making sure it's equitable is a whole other challenge.
Yeah, the plan itself is very comprehensive. It covers a wide range of issues from clean energy and transportation to greening and waste reduction. But what sets it apart is the emphasis on equity and community engagement. They're not just trying to make Baltimore more environmentally friendly, they're trying to make sure those benefits are shared fairly across all communities.
So it's not just about ticking boxes, but about addressing those deep-rooted inequalities we've been discussing.
Exactly. The Commission has played a key role in pushing the city to adopt an environmental justice framework, ensuring that the plan takes into account the specific needs and concerns of those historically marginalized communities.
That's encouraging to hear, but how does this framework translate into action? Is the plan actually making a difference on the ground?
Absolutely. One clear example is the focus on greening vacant lots, a huge problem in many Baltimore neighborhoods, particularly those that have been redlined and disinvested.
Right, we talked about how those vacant lots contribute to so many issues, from crime and blight to those awful heat island effects and lack of green space. What's the city actually doing to tackle this?
Well, the sustainability plan aims to transform those vacant lots into community assets. They're creating green spaces, parks, urban gardens, and even affordable housing. It's a multifaceted approach.
That's fantastic. It's about turning blight into something beautiful and useful, creating opportunities for recreation, growing food, and strengthening communities.
Exactly, and it's not just about the physical transformation. It's about ensuring that the process itself is community-driven, giving residents a voice in what happens in their neighborhoods.
So it's not just a top-down solution imposed on these communities. They have ownership over these projects and a say in how they unfold.
Precisely. That community engagement piece is crucial. It's about building relationships, trust, and a sense of shared responsibility. It's not just about planning, it's about working together.
It's about recognizing that communities have so much knowledge and expertise about their own needs, and that they should be active partners, not just passive recipients of decisions made by others.
Absolutely, and this approach isn't limited to greening vacant lots.
Right.
It's being applied to other aspects of the sustainability plan as well, from energy efficiency upgrades to transportation improvements. It's becoming a model for how the city approaches these issues.
So it's a holistic approach that recognizes how interconnected everything is. Environmental justice is tied to housing, transportation, health, economic opportunity. It's all woven together.
You got it. And it's about expanding our understanding of environmental justice. It's not just about pollution and toxins, but about creating a truly healthy and thriving environment for everyone.
It's about making sure everyone has equal access to the benefits of a clean and sustainable environment, whether it's clean air and water, green spaces, healthy food, or safe and affordable transportation. It's about a future where environmental justice isn't just an aspiration, but a reality for all communities.
Well said. And what's interesting is that Baltimore's experience offers valuable lessons for other cities grappling with similar challenges.
Right.
It demonstrates that even in a city with such a deeply entrenched history of segregation and environmental injustice, positive change is possible. It's not easy, but it can be done.
It's about recognizing that those legacies of the past can be overcome, but takes a real commitment to equity, community engagement, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. It requires a shift in mindset, moving away from that top-down approach to planning and embracing a more collaborative, community-driven model. It's about trusting communities to be part of the solution.
It's about recognizing that the people most affected by environmental problems are often the ones who have the best insights into solutions if we just listen to them and empower them to act.
You're absolutely right. And this shift in mindset isn't just happening in Baltimore, it's a growing movement across the country as more and more cities are realizing the importance of environmental justice and community engagement in creating a truly sustainable future. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
That's inspiring to hear. It sounds like Baltimore is at the forefront of this movement, using its unique experience to pave the way for others.
In many ways, yes. The city's history has forced it to confront these issues head-on, and in doing so, it's developing innovative approaches that can serve as models for other cities. They're turning a painful past into a catalyst for positive change.
That's a powerful way to think about it. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, really shedding light on the complex relationship between history, environment, and social justice in Baltimore. We've learned about the lasting impacts of segregation, the unexpected distribution of environmental burdens and benefits, and the crucial role of procedural justice in creating a more equitable future. It's clear that there's a lot we can learn from Baltimore's experience.
Indeed. And what we've seen is that Baltimore is stepping up to meet these challenges. They're embracing community-driven solutions, innovative planning approaches, and a commitment to environmental justice that is inspiring other cities across the country. It's a story of hope and progress.
But, as always, there's more to uncover. Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive into Baltimore's environmental justice legacy, where we'll explore the ongoing debate surrounding tree planting programs, the complexities of gentrification, and the challenge of balancing competing priorities in pursuit of a more just and sustainable city. Welcome back to our final part of our Baltimore deep dive. We've uncovered some really surprising twists and turns in the story of environmental justice here, and now we're going to tackle a topic that often sparks debate: tree planting programs.
Tree planting. On the surface, it seems like a pretty simple win-win, right? More trees, more green spaces, everyone's happy.
Right.
But as we've seen with Baltimore, it's rarely that straightforward.
Yeah.
The historical context really matters.
Absolutely. We learned earlier that some predominantly African-American neighborhoods view these programs with skepticism, even resistance, right?
Right.
And it's not about hating trees or wanting to live in a concrete jungle. It's about this deep-rooted distrust stemming from decades of neglect and those broken promises from the city.
Exactly. They've seen firsthand how well-intentioned programs can sometimes backfire, leading to things like gentrification and displacement. It's like they're constantly having to weigh the potential benefits against the very real risk of being pushed out of their own communities.
Let's talk more about that gentrification piece because it's such a hot-button issue, especially when it comes to urban greening projects. How is this playing out in Baltimore?
Well, it's a valid concern. Imagine you live in a neighborhood that's been struggling for years, right?
Yeah.
With unemployment, crime, maybe crumbling infrastructure.
Right.
Then suddenly the city announces this major tree planting initiative.
On the surface, it sounds positive.
Right.
More trees, cleaner air. Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. But those residents might see those trees as a sign of change. They didn't ask for and they aren't ready for.
Right.
They've seen this story play out before. Soon after the trees come in, property values start to rise, rents increase, and longtime residents who often have lower incomes get priced out.
Yeah.
It can be a very real consequence.
It's that classic pattern of green gentrification, where environmental improvements end up benefiting wealthier newcomers while exacerbating existing inequalities.
Exactly. And this is particularly sensitive in Baltimore, given its history of redlining and disinvestment in minority neighborhoods. Those historical injustices make these communities especially vulnerable to displacement.
So how do we balance the desire for a greener, healthier city with the need to protect vulnerable communities from being pushed out? It seems like a really tricky dilemma.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
It requires a multi-pronged approach that combines, smart urban planning, genuine community engagement, and policies that prioritize affordable housing and economic opportunities for existing residents.
Right.
We can't just focus on the environmental piece without addressing the social and economic context.
So it's about planting the seeds of a more equitable future, not just trees.
Well said. And this brings us back to the concept of procedural justice that we talked about earlier. If residents feel like decisions about these projects are being made for them, not with them, it's bound to create resentment and distrust. They need to have a seat at the table from the very beginning.
So genuine community engagement isn't just a box to check off. It's like the foundation for successful and equitable urban greening. It has to be built on that trust and collaboration.
Absolutely. It's about involving residents from the get-go, listening to their concerns, working together to develop solutions that benefit everyone. It's not about imposing a vision from the outside, but about co-creating a shared future.
It really highlights how environmental justice goes hand in hand with social and economic justice. They're not separate issues, they're all interconnected.
Exactly. We can't solve one without addressing the others. And Baltimore's story is a perfect example of that. It's a city grappling with, complex legacies of injustice, but it's also a city brimming with resilience, innovation, and a determination to create a better future for all its residents.
That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about problems, it's about solutions and the people working to make those solutions a reality.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to environmental justice. It requires a deep understanding of the local context, a willingness to listen and learn from those most affected, and a commitment to working together to find solutions that are both equitable and sustainable.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening journey through Baltimore's environmental justice landscape. We've uncovered surprising patterns, challenged assumptions, and seen how history continues to shape the present in ways we might not expect. But most importantly, we've seen how a city can confront its past and work towards a more just and sustainable future for all its residents. It's a story of hope and a testament to the power of community engagement and collaborative action. We hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think more critically about the environmental challenges in your own communities and the role that history plays in shaping them. Remember, the pursuit of environmental justice is an ongoing process, and it requires all of us to be engaged, informed, and committed to creating a better world for everyone.